Welcome to DevOps 101, the very vital basics. I'm Lindsay with Beyond 20. Going to introduce your speakers for today and go through just a little bit of housekeeping, and then we'll go ahead and get started. I'm going to go through the agenda real quick. A little history, please, is where we're going to start today. We're going to give you some background on DevOps, where it started, how long it's been around, and what the story is really on where this all went from being a bit of a niche industry to something that expanded into the larger consciousness. Then we're going to move into why this should matter to you. It's development, but it's not just software development. It's a much broader scope at this point. So we're going to discuss why it's something that you should take the time to get a good handle on and how it can help your organization. What is DevOps? This is going to be the bulk of the presentation. We're going to go through exactly what it entails, and then we're going to move on to how you can get it started at your organization. It's one of the more complicated philosophies, I think, to get rolling. So to follow some really solid, tangible tips to make sure you've got the appropriate implementation ready to go is really important. So we're going to hit that, and then we're going to make some time for questions and go over some upcoming events, and then we'll let you go about your day. So ERIKA FLORA is your host for today, the lovely and talented ERIKA FLORA. She's a principal at Beyond 20. She's an IDLE expert, certified Scrum Master, certified Scrum Product Owner, certified Scrum Professional, and all-around great gal. She's also PMP and PGMP, which didn't make the slide. ERIKA is my boss. She is wonderful and has lots and lots of information on DevOps to share with you today. And we have remotely, not ERIKA FLORA again. Whoops. Andy Rivers is his name. ERIKA.
I like that better, actually.
This is Andy Rivers. He's a senior advisor at Beyond 20. He's a former associate CIO of the University of Tennessee system. So he's got a lot of experience in the industry, a lot of security experience to add to the mix too, which is always helpful when implementing new methodologies and philosophies. He's also an IDLE expert, certified Scrum Master, and he's just okay.
It's okay. I've been called way worse than ERIKA, so.
I'm going to take the hit on that one. So I'm going to pass it to ERIKA, who's going to tell you a little bit about us, and then we'll get rolling with DevOps 101.
So which ERIKA did you want to?
I'll take the ERIKA with the longer hair.
Oh, okay, good. All right, so that'll be me. So for those of you that have not attended one of our webinars before, I'll just give a quick introduction of who we are and what we do, and then I'll jump into the meat of the session. So the name Beyond 20 actually comes from a Gartner research study where they looked at when mission critical systems in an organization fail, the stuff that's essential to the mission of an organization that allows companies to bring in money, to ship product, the stuff that's vital to the inner workings of an organization. When they looked at root cause, when those kinds of things fail, they found that actually only 20% of the time is it due to failures in things like hardware and software, the stuff. That 80% of the time it's due to failure in people and failure in process. Someone makes a change and they don't think about the impact, or there isn't a process for how to work, or it's chaotic. And so that's really what we're passionate about. That's the crux of who we are at Beyond 20. And so we help organizations fix the people and the process stuff through webinars like this, through training, through consulting, through assessments, a whole mix of stuff. Actually, we have a conference coming up in May, which we'll talk about as well, 2-day conference, where we really focus on those kinds of things throughout the 2 days. For those of you that are attending this webinar and are PMP certified, because we are an accredited training organization and a registered educational provider through PMI, you will get 1 PDU for attending. So that's a bit about us. Let's jump into what this whole DevOps thing is, and I think it's important to start with a little bit of history around where this term came from and who some of the players have been that have been proponents of this idea and really moving it forward. So it first started back in 2008. A gentleman by the name of Patrick, I'm going to say Dubois, and hope that is correct. He first introduced the idea at an Agile conference in Toronto. He's since become a major thought leader in the field. He works as an independent consultant and really is a DevOps philosophy kind of champion. And something interesting that Lindsay said, she said that this is a complicated way of working, and I think the thought behind it is very simple, But just because it's simple doesn't mean that it's easy. And so a lot of organizations think, oh, DevOps, this is something very straightforward for our organization. And the philosophy of it is, but how you implement it and how you get it right, it's all about execution. And we'll talk about that some more here in a bit. So it started all around 2008. Patrick created, a bit of buzz around it, and it was carried forward in 2009. When John Alspaugh and Paul Hammond gave what is kind of termed the seminal DevOps presentation. They worked for Flickr at the time. One was the head of development, one was the head of operations. And this was the first time on a large scale that they talked about the idea of development and operations working together in this way. And they were a successful case story, not just the theory behind it, but like actually showed how the two could work together to move an organization forward successfully. So that was a pretty compelling presentation that was given. And then in 2011, Cameron Hite, he brought DevOps to the mainstream. He put in a slide into his presentation around this philosophy of DevOps, and he was working for Gartner Research at the time, so it really gave some heft and some weight to this concept. The quote that he gave got that's listed here got the attention of companies outside of just some of the niche markets, and really got some larger organizations thinking about, hey, maybe this is an approach we need to take. It's not just, these small little .com companies, but really it has some bigger implications. And so the quote was that by 2015, DevOps will evolve from a niche strategy employed by large cloud providers into a mainstream strategy employed by 20% of Global 2000 organizations. In 2013, Gene Kim wrote a book called The Phoenix Project that continues to, put thoughts down on paper and drive the concept even further. And then in 2014, large, now, recognizable organizations started adopting DevOps. So if you look here, Lego, Target was a big strum. That's not a word. Was a big one. Nordstrom. I was looking at the word Nordstrom and creating a new word in my head. So in 2014, some of these bigger companies really started saying, hey, we're going to adopt this philosophy, and really made some significant investment and effort to move in this direction, and have become successful as a result.
Hey, ERIKA. This is the other ERIKA with a slightly lower voice. You mentioned something in there that, I think is maybe good to mention here at the beginning is, you mentioned that it's simple but not easy. So when we look through this, it's not rocket science. We're not going to treat, teaching you pre-calculus or anything. Some of these are some basic concepts that make sense that we should be doing. The reason we aren't is because it's not easy. So it's that difference between simple and easy. And I think one of the first tips that we can give people is that they're going to have the fortitude to stick with this for a little while and know that it's going to start out rough and they have to improve it over time. That you can't just start this and a month later go, oh man, this isn't getting any better. It's even worse than it was before. You have to have some fortitude to stick with this and know that you're going to make it better over time.
Absolutely. So I'll just add to that. I think that's the case with any buzzword that a company or a government agency grabs onto. And I've seen this happen with IT service management. I've seen this happen with agile concepts. It's inevitably going to happen with DevOps. There's a heavy lift at the beginning, and if you don't stick with it, it will just become another buzzword that you're like, we tried DevOps. It didn't work. And it's like, I like to use the analogy, it's like going to the gym. You don't just go one time and you're like, well, I don't see a difference. No, you got to go through some pain. You got to go through some suffering, and you really have to stick with it before you start to see the benefit. And unfortunately, most organizations don't stick with it. They feel the pain and go, that's not for us.
Right. It's that fundamental being able to stick with it to see the value long enough.
Yep, absolutely. So let's keep going. So why DevOps? So what is the benefit? Why go through all the pain and the suffering? What do you hope to get at the end of it? And these are just some quick things to really help you understand the light at the end of the tunnel. The reason why you would start adopting DevOps, as a philosophy and bringing change into your organization is because you want higher quality of products and services. You're looking for shorter cycle time, shorter release time, so you can get product more quickly out the door. You want quicker feedback loops. Ultimately, you're going to end up with lower costs. You may not necessarily at the beginning, but that's the end goal. Lower levels of burnout over the long term and higher organizational performance. And this goes, to add to what Andy said previously, you really have to adopt this culture of learning and continuous improvement, and this can help you do that. So what is DevOps? It is not a methodology, not yet anyhow. It's not a method or a prescribed way of working. It's really more of a philosophy at this stage. But this has happened with a lot of other things that have become methods, have become frameworks. DevOps is just a lot newer. Project management started in the late 60s. It actually, what we have today with this project management body of knowledge, this hefty 300-page book, essentially, it's now in its 5th edition, but it started out as a white paper. And a couple of project managers, I don't even think they were called project managers at the time, a couple of folks got together and said, we should do projects better than we're doing them now, and here's a couple of ideas on how to do that. And then over time grew into a framework. There's also project management methodologies, there's standards out there, but that has happened and that has evolved over a few decades now. Agile, same way. It started out as a documented manifesto, very lightweight, and now has gotten into, probably 15 or more different methods or ways of execution. So you've got things from Scrum, extreme programming, all the way up to large-scale methods like SAFe. So again, has evolved over time. DevOps, right now, a lot of it is still being figured out by organizations. And I think over time it will become much more mature, but we're still pretty much in the early stages. I don't know, Andy, what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I was about to add that, it's the good and bad of where DevOps is now. It's freedom enough to tailor it to your organization and, really get the value out of it that you need for your company. The bad side is when you run into those challenges, and you will, there's no, body of knowledge or reference to look back to and go, hey, are we doing this right? Are we following best practice? It's sort of concepts sort of put together by different individuals, but there's no wholesale sort of body of knowledge out there that you can reference for that good sort of best practice around doing it.
Not yet, but I'm sure there will be shortly. Cool. So if you do a Google search on DevOps, your brain might actually explode, because the good and the bad, like Andy was saying, is that everyone has an opinion on what the philosophy is and what the definition is. This is one definition that we really like. I think it does a good job of explaining the philosophy, and it says that the philosophy strives for integration of development and operations teams to improve collaboration, improve productivity by automating infrastructure and workflows, and then continuously measuring application performance. And so it really is the combination of development and operations in this idea of DevOps.
Yeah, and I think that's got some really good key words in there. When you talk about integration and collaboration, that means it's not dev and then ops anymore. They're not two wholly separate things that only talk to each other during the CAB meetings. This is the teams really getting together and focusing more on providing the value, providing that end deliverable than just their individual pieces. And, even when we get down and we start unpacking some of the rest of that, and we talk about automating and continuously measuring and getting better, that impacts both teams and across the gambit. To be able to do some of this automation, the ops team, the sysadmins, they're not going to be able to totally automate anything on their own without the developers. And same thing goes for the developers. They can only automate so far until they need interactions with the system, and they need interaction with those sysadmins and the operators to be able to carry out those functions all the way. So this really is those two teams tightly integrated, tightly working together.
Yeah. And to that extent, it's about breaking down the silos between those two teams. Since the beginning of time, and gosh, I've worked in so many environments like this where development will come up with something really cool. At the end of the project, they will lob the grenade or or lob whatever it is. I call it the crap sandwich. I don't know why, but they lob it over the wall, and then operations get stuck with supporting it. And yet operations had very little to do with any of it when it was in development, and frankly has issues. And so it's about bringing those two groups together, with systems, with also even just how they work. So for example, we have one customer on the East Coast that is physically knocking down walls and putting the developers with operations folks and having them sit together so they can actually talk, which they've never actually done. They were actually on different floors of the building and had no visibility into what the other was doing. And so they're really, in a physical way, bringing the two teams together as well.
Yeah, and I know in this sort of virtual world, we try and, get people to work virtually as much as we can and that sort of stuff. But there's still a lot to be said for being co-located and being able to physically have conversations back and forth. And I know we're not saying everyone needs to go out and start knocking down the physical walls and that sort of stuff, but we really do need to get these teams working better together. And in some cases, that does mean getting them to sit beside each other, because that just facilitates the conversation. Because rather than sending 15 emails back and forth, I can just get up and go walk and talk to someone, and that's way quicker to do things, and it's way more efficient. And I think part of this too is that we've probably both been in this situation where, on the dev side, you sit there and go, man, operations just doesn't know what to do. Why aren't they getting things done? Meanwhile, you could probably sit in an ops meeting and they're saying the very similar thing about the developers. Hey, the developers just don't know what we do. They gave us this. How are we supposed to support it? And sort of getting those two teams to work knocks that down, so you don't have that back and forth, and rather back to that sort of collaboration. It's, hey, how do we make this better? How do we deliver this to our customer in a way that the customer will want it and can accomplish the task that they need?
Yeah, I think, Andy, to piggyback on that a little bit, just speaking in terms of the culture of the organization and how important specifically with DevOps it is to make sure you've got everyone culturally in the same place prior to kicking it off. This antagonistic relationship can sometimes exist between dev and ops, where they see each other as the enemy, ops discouraging change or discouraging innovation, and so you really have to, as a company, everyone sit down, get together and say, we're not going to discourage change, we're going to encourage it, but we're going to automate it, we're going to do what we need to do to make sure everyone can get their job done without tearing all their hair out.
Right, and I think that also goes back to the fortitude we talked about earlier, and the fact that I can't sit in one of these teams and throw up enough roadblocks that this will eventually go away, and I can just settle back into working the way that I've always worked. We have to see this through, that we actually change behaviors and we change the way that we're working.
Yeah. Andy, you want to take this one?
Yeah, so this is one, as we talk about, I think we've mentioned Agile, we've mentioned Scaled, so there's a lot of sort of philosophies and methodologies and those sorts of things springing up on the development side that are really geared and designed to get improvements rapidly to the customer. So this idea of rapid deployment, DevOps has sort of adopted this continuous delivery sort of phrase. So it's one of those things that if we increase on the development side, we can't allow ops to be the bottleneck. So if they're cranking out features and enhancements once a week, but our environment, our infrastructure can't support pushing those changes out but once a month, we haven't actually seen that value. That value has not been actualized because we're still on the same timeline. We're still on that same old cadence. So we got to remove the bottlenecks. And the bottlenecks, I even did it. I immediately went to ops, but sometimes it's going to be development. It's going to be on both sides. So it's back to that collaboration of both teams looking at the entire process and going, okay, where are our bottlenecks at? Okay, now we found a bottleneck. How do we make it better? For example, one bottleneck is we keep having problems every time we push to production, and we identify that it's the fact that our development and QA tiers don't accurately match production. So whenever we push, we have problems. Well, there's a fix for that. Let's figure out how to make the environments match more closely so that we don't have those issues. And that's going to take both teams working together. One team can't solve that type of issue by themselves. And so that's an example of them having to come together and collaborate to solve that bottleneck, to remove it. And so that's sort of what we're talking about when we talk about this integration and collaboration.
Yeah, and one thing that I've been hearing a lot about in terms of the integration, and I think I might be jumping the gun on this. I believe we've got a slide coming up that speaks to the shifting left idea, but we've arrived. The idea of shared version control and giving both sides equal access to the latest version of whatever it is that's going on the dev side, so ops can have an opportunity to plan and be a part of that conversation. And kind of going back to the idea of creating a physical space that welcomes collaboration, I think that's part of it too, is making sure people have access to the latest and greatest so they're not being surprised by things. So that's something that a lot of organizations that have been adopting DevOps have introduced, is this one-stop shop in a way where securely, of course, both sides can have access and move along together through development and deployment.
Yeah, there's been some, classic challenges along the way where, in some examples, development will pull down a code base. They go over, design their code for the next, 3 months. They come back, they sort of drop the code and walk away. So kind of like they drop the mic and leave, and they're like, okay, push that in production. Well, when they push it to production, we've had 3 months of changes along the way. So that's not going to go well. I think most of us have probably lived through that. And so the idea is, how do we keep them in sync? And it's going to take, it's not just the developers starting, kind of changing and doing better. It's going to change because the systems are going to have to be able to push, whatever changes happen over those 3 months, they need to get replicated across all the environments pretty quickly. And they also can't disrupt the work that the developers are doing. One of the times when I was managing a group of sysadmins, they viewed development boxes as development. They're like, oh, well, from a sysadmin point of view, if it says development, I can restart it whenever I need to because it's not production. Well, in reality, those development systems are production for your developers. That's what they work on day in and day out. So you're restarting their main way of getting work done. So that's sort of one of those areas where the two groups aren't in alignment. And that sort of goes to this idea, if we shift it back to the left and say, okay, this development area and test and stage, these are all the steps that are designed to improve and produce this final deliverable for our customers. So how do we stay in sync across all three of these and not just try and match up at stage and production?
Excellent. So these are 4 key principles that we see a lot and we recommend to folks or to our customers when they're looking to implement DevOps to their organization. It's to make sure that dev and test, that you develop and test against production-like principles, that you deploy with repeatable, reliable processes, you monitor and validate operational quality, and you amplify your feedback loops. Andy, do you want to give some additional thoughts against these?
So, the development test against production-like principles, that was sort of what I was mentioning when we were talking about that sort of shift left, that the things that we're designing and testing actually match to what we're going to deliver so that we don't have this sort of surprise at the end. That really starts back with making sure we started at a good spot. If we start at a good spot, we're in sync, development and test actually match production, we're going to be way more successful as we move through this. And the sort of the second one, deploy with repeatable and reliable processes. Every time we roll something out, it shouldn't be a new learning process. Oh, hey, to push this code update, you have to do a database update, run this script, and do this. Have these 5 different steps, and then the next time we go update that same application, it's 10 different steps. We should be able to normalize that. That's also the foundation for automation. And so whenever we talk about delivering things quicker, automation is one of the main ways to do that. You can only automate it if it's repeatable and reliable. And so that's sort of the foundation of establishing that and getting you toward that automation step. The next is we need to make sure we're monitoring, validating that sort of operational quality. So, that's twofold. It's, as a developer designs something, if something goes wrong, write out the errors. Tell us what happened. Tell us what didn't go well. And then on the sysadmin side and the operational side, it's, hey, did you pick that error up? Did you even notice? We designed it into the program, but nobody was watching. So, it's both of those sides to say, okay, as we go through, we need to develop and build in quality from the beginning, not try and test it in later. And so that's sort of what this is at. One of the things we cover when we talk about in ITIL classes and that sort of stuff is really establishing the metrics up front, that you should build those in at service design. And this is just sort of that, the application of that same principle, that we need to build in those measurements, and then we need to monitor and validate them as we go forward. A big part of this too, and we talked about that integration and collaboration, is sort of that 4th bullet point of amplifying the feedback loop. So our feedback loop shouldn't be, hey, developer develops something, we come to a change advisory board meeting, we approve it, it's going to be pushed out to production on the weekend, sysadmin pushes it to production, things don't go well, and so then we talk about it in the next CAB meeting. We capture it as a lesson learned and maybe in our post-implementation review. And then a week later, we talk about how we're going to fix it. At that point, we're like 3 weeks away. We're 3 weeks removed from where we originally had that problem. And it also means we've been doing other changes and pushes out that could have benefited from that. So how do we get that feedback quicker, and how do we get it incorporated so that it makes an immediate improvement? Back to that idea of continuous delivery. If we're doing that, we need to get the feedback quicker so that we can actually improve things along the way. It's that whole, the plan, do, check, act of the Deming cycle. Are we doing the do part of it? Are we going to come back and actually make sure we do this and get the feedback incorporated quicker?
I want to transition us a little bit into tips. This is the philosophy, these are the principles, but how do you actually start using some of this stuff in your own organization? And this is what we always tell folks is define what DevOps means for your organization. That doesn't mean, okay, we need to have higher quality, we need to have all the benefits that we want to get out of DevOps, so let's do DevOps. DevOps should not be your goal. Your goal should be, let's find a problem that's going on in our organization, and let's use these concepts to resolve that problem. So start with the end in mind and define how DevOps is going to help you address those needs. Because at the end of the day, you don't do DevOps because you want another buzzword in your organization. You want to look at DevOps because you want to solve business challenges. So define that first and then figure out where to go from there.
Exactly. This sort of matches back to that freedom that we talked about earlier. There's not a set definition of what it is, so you need to define what it's going to be for your organization. And again, like you said, it doesn't need to be do DevOps. It needs to be, okay, what's the problem we're having that this sort of philosophy will help us solve?
Yeah, absolutely. So tip number 2, don't try to boil the ocean. Once you've decided what it is that you're going to do, define a project and pilot it out. Make sure that there's a smooth introduction, and Lindsay touched on this earlier. Find dev members and ops folks that you introduce to one another, and you define expectations of this is how this is going to be moving forward, set expectations, and give those teams the tools that they need to be successful. Make sure everybody understands what you're trying to do, understands the difference and the change in behavior that they have to make, and allow them time to adjust and get used to the new way of working.
Yeah, and we talked about that collaboration, and then even all the way down to the automation. Those aren't free. You have to plan those in. They're not just going to magically happen. They're not going to happen because we did step 1 and we defined DevOps. They're going to happen because we made time for them. We made them a priority. And so that's sort of, what we're describing there is allow more time for ops. Is if we want to make that better, we want to make it smoother, let's make sure we don't just treat that as a 15-minute task at the end to push it to production. Let's actually give that the attention we need to identify how did it go, how can we make it better, can we automate that. All of that comes at a cost, but that cost paid up front will lessen your cost down the road. It'll also allow us to go faster. It'll allow us to push more things out. So it's a cost well spent, but it's still a cost.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And we've worked with a number of organizations that unfortunately when projects like this fail, it's because leadership says, we're going to do DevOps. And they have a kickoff meeting, but don't, like Andy was alluding to, give folks the time, give them the resources, give them the budget a lot of times to make those things a reality. It's like buying the gym membership. You can't just buy the membership. Turns out you have to actually go and do the hard work.
Wait a minute, you're kind of shattering my gym plan.
It's still early in the year.
That's terrible news.
I thought this just magically happened because I said I was going to the gym.
Oh, Andy, we should talk.
But we're all getting a chuckle maybe at my bad joke there, but how often do businesses do that? Hey, we're going to do DevOps now. It's going to go. It's going to be awesome. We're going to fix things, and then never actually follow through with the time and resources to carry it out.
Yeah.
This is when I was doing some research a couple months back for another presentation, I kept coming across how this is the worst philosophy to be introduced into an organization from the top down. It will not work because it requires so much communication and trust. You can't just call a meeting and say, this is what we're doing now. Good luck, fellas. It might work with some other philosophies, but it certainly doesn't work with this one.
Well, yeah, I mean, exactly. Kind of back to one of the points earlier was this really is tearing down a couple of silos that have been there, and just simply telling people to work better together. There's a reason those silos are there. They've established. And again, you're changing the way people work. So, yeah, that's going to take time and effort.
Yeah, and then tip 3 speaks to that too. Think resource capacity and deadlines. Make time for it in your schedule. Allow yourself time. Don't try to tackle everything, but introduce this concept with some piloted programs or projects over time.
Yeah, and a good, maybe a good pilot and that sort of stuff is to say, okay, we have this repeatable process with application X. We release it. We know our time to release is 15 days. We want to include some DevOps times for these teams to work together to take that from 15 days to 12. That's quantifiable. That's good. The business should see an actual value from that. They're getting things quicker. But again, that's not going to happen without us assigning time to it. And that's a good way to start out, is pick some areas that maybe are working pretty well now that you want to make better. Maybe, trying to tackle the giant spaghetti mess of one of your hardest applications probably isn't the best place to start with this.
And you'll notice, can we go back real quick?
Yeah.
You'll notice on the charts there.
No, it's too late.
Never look back. Just real quick, you'll notice that the size of the slice there cut out for operations is the same on either side, but just inserting DevOps into the capacity that's already set aside for operations and expecting them to still be able to manage the amount of work they had prior to the adoption of DevOps is unrealistic. And I think that's an important capacity thing. When we talked on the last slide about allowing more time for operations, this is a big change in terms of the time that'll be dedicated to it. So to manage those expectations in terms of what they will be able to produce, I think is important to remember for leaderships in these organizations.
Oh yeah, you can't just continue to add food to someone's plate. Some of that stuff's going to fall off
right
eventually. So
yeah,
you will have to say no to other things potentially, and folks don't always like to do that.
It's hard to keep that perspective. I think sometimes, it's easy to just dump stuff, but that's a big one for the burnout factor too, I think, Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one of the core things to mention on that one too, I'll make her go back. We're going back again. Is the idea that some places think, oh, we're going to do DevOps and we're going to make operations more efficient, and that pie wedge will actually get smaller and we'll have more room for projects. That's not the goal of DevOps. The goal is a sort of continuous delivery, speeding it up and getting more value to the customer quicker. So that pie wedge, yeah, we may get more efficient at application X, which now we're going to spend those resources and get more efficient at application Y. It's not, the goal isn't to make that pie wedge smaller, it's to make it more efficient and get more value out of what's happening in that pie wedge.
We should move forward.
Finally. Tip number 4, hire the right people. You really want to, especially at the beginning, well, at all times, you want to look for development folks who can think like operations and vice versa. And with that said, those are probably going to be the resources that are already stretched really thin because they can see both sides of that, and they're probably really, they've got some strong skills, and other folks want them on other projects.
This is probably the biggest challenge people have with the adoption, is actually having the realistic approach, but then even if we have the realistic approach, do we have the people to do it? Do we have those people that can kind of straddle both sides of the fence and understand both of them to help get things going? Over time, you'll build this in. It'll be one of those things your teams just do. So development will understand, ops will understand, and they'll start working together. But to get you started, you have to have some people that understand both sides of the fence. And as you mentioned, if you have those now, that's your top tier people. Those are the same people that everyone wants for all of their projects. So from the very beginning, there should be a plan for building depth in some of these skills.
Yeah, and I heard Lindsay touch on this too. Those resources might be more expensive. When you go to look to hire folks, they're going to be in high demand.
Yeah, I think that's definitely true. Definitely, starting out right here at sort of this beginning of this philosophy and those sorts of things, these are going to be primo skills. You're going to have to pay for them. But if you think about it now, you're already paying for it. You're paying for it in the inefficiencies. You're paying for it in the missed deadlines. You're paying for it in that the ball bouncing back and forth between the silos. So you're already paying it. It's just, do you want to pay it in the inefficiencies of the organization, or do you want to pay it in hopefully some key personnel salaries to help make this better over time?
Absolutely. So with that said, if you guys are interested in learning more, Beyond 2016, we are running in downtown Washington, D.C., May 2nd and 3rd, and we're exploring the concepts at a deeper level of DevOps and IT service management, how you bring those two sides together to ultimately bring more value to customers and produce more quickly high quality products and services. So it's going to be a 2-day conference. Day 1 is going to be a lot of thought leadership learning. Day 2 is a lot of practical application, and we're going to have hands-on simulations and practical workshops, and it's going to be really, really cool. If any of you guys have been to any of our training sessions, we don't do the standard listen and sit in a chair and listen to and watch somebody go through a series of slides that are full of words. We tend to play a lot of games and make our courses extremely interactive, because when you're having fun and doing, you're learning and retaining more. And so we're expanding upon that format into a 2-day interactive conference. Should be a really fun time.
And we've got February 18th. If you need an introduction to IDLE, we are here for you. 12 p.m. You can sign up on our site, which you'll find the information for that on the next page, or you can head straight to the GoToWebinar. So,
any questions? Here's all of our contact info. We are all over social media. So if you guys like to tweet or Facebook or YouTube it, is that a verb? YouTube it?
I think we can verb that. Seems reasonable.
And this is my contact information, our main number. So if you guys have any questions, please do put them into the chat window right now. Also, feel free to reach out to us afterwards if you're like an hour later, you're like, it's such a great question for them, and now they're gone. You can send us an email. You can give us a call as well, or reach out to us on social media. So any questions here?
While you're checking there, I know one of the questions that I hear often is just, where do they get started? Where do we start at? And, I think Lindsay said it, starting at the grassroots of trying to get the ops and the dev teams working together. There's a lot those two teams can start doing at a grassroots level. You need management buy-in to be able to eventually start spending those resources and those types of things. But those two teams can work together and maybe get some early wins and show the value of the two teams collaborating more, directly and providing that integration. So you don't necessarily have to have that top-down, town hall of telling everyone we're going to do it to get started. Eventually, you're going to need that to be able to have the resources and make it successful, but you can start this one out at sort of a grassroots level and grow from there.
Okay, so the only question I see at the moment is around some resources, and I think I can speak to that a little bit. We mentioned, and we're going to publish this video later for you guys to watch, and we'll have the slides sent out via email, so you'll have all this information. But when we talked about the history of DevOps, a lot of the guys who were in on the ground floor there have really prolific websites, and some of them, like Gene Kim, have published really popular books on the study, and I would recommend going out and looking for them specifically. But there's a whole wide world out there because it's so new. It's really an interesting time to do research and even become a part of the conversation, since it's still kind of getting its legs. Dig through those blog posts, find holes in it, find ways that you think you can improve it and continue to contribute to the conversation as it goes from philosophy to methodology. And with that, I think we're going to let you nice people go about your day. Thanks so much for joining us. Email ERIKA there, or you can send an email to info@beyond20 if you guys have any questions later on, and we will see you next time.